Hi there, it's Tania here answering my Ask Me Anything question of the week. And this week's question comes from Anna. And Anna says, if I read it out, hi Tanya, as a sole trader OT and recently registered NDIS provider, I'd love to know how to complete my disability worker screening in Queensland. It seems to be providing a very convoluted process. And I guess I will answer for Queensland specifically for Anna, but I get asked this all the time, and it is really a big challenge when I'm working with specifically unregistered providers or providers who aren't registered yet. Is a whole nother convoluted process, as Anna put it. So to answer Anna's questions, for Queensland, there's quite a few exceptions to the rules and quite a few processes. So in Queensland, you have your existing yellow card holders who have one set of process, and there may be an exemption if you already have a yellow card in place, and there's certain time frames around when your yellow card was established or set up. And when that expires. If you're new from the 1st of February 21, anyone new to the sector who didn't have a yellow card previously needs to get a disability worker screening check. Their Queensland website, because even though it's called a national worker screening check, each state still undertakes that check. So the Queensland department says that there's a no card, no start process that applies. This only applies to registered providers though. Unregistered providers and self-managed providers, so providers who are providing supports to plan manage or self-manage, may request worker screening if they want their workers to wait until clearance has been received. So that has to be prompted by the participant, it sounds like, by reading that wording. So there's two types of checks in Queensland. There's an NDIS worker screening check, and there is a Queensland disability worker screening clearance. So one is for NDIS providers, which is federally funded for registered providers, and one of them is for people working in state-based or state-funded providers. So the NDIS worker screening check is the one if you're a registered provider, and if you're an unregistered provider, or if you're doing state-based funding programs, which might be things like volunteer programs or things outside the NDIS, there is a Queensland disability worker screening clearance, and there's slightly different processes for both. On the website, I'll put the link in the notes if I can figure out how to do that. There is it explains that in a little bit more detail. On the how do we apply then for the NDIS worker screening check, it's basically a process of going into Proda. So you log into Proda and you go to the NDIS worker screening check app or portal, and when you're in there is prompts for you to follow to put your details in there. Now I believe you do need to be a registered provider to access that, to lodge those. I do think actually it's also taking quite a long time. It goes through the Commission's portal back through the state provider, and I believe you need to set up your ID to set up your Proda in the first instance, and go through that process. So I don't know if I've explained that very well. I feel like, yes, it's really convoluted. I kind of feel like maybe it needs a screen share video to go through the steps. And feel free to reach out if you want to book a 15-minute consult, and I can share screens with you and we can go through the process and have a look at it. You can open your Proda, we can open it together and go through the steps together. Might actually answer your question better. Worker screening is a bit of a nightmare. I have had my unregistered providers unable to get worker screening, especially when they're in the lead up to audit, and it's caused quite a lot of stress. Usually my advice is, if you're unable to get the worker screening check, do a police check. It's not a requirement, but at least it minimizes your risk as a business that a police check should show any issues with the worker screening checks. A police check should be the level above. It is a little bit more expensive, but it does cover yourself. So if you're an unregistered provider can't get access, or you're waiting a really long time for the state departments to issue your screening checks, you can still do a police check, a federal police check. It doesn't need to be through the police. You can do them through people who have access to the police database. There's quite a few of those out there to have a look at, and that just covers yourself and gives you some assurances in your business, and you can just keep all of that documentation for the auditor and show the auditor that you've tried to do the state-based process and you're waiting, etc., which is the case for another client of mine this week who has an audit next week and has been waiting 12 weeks for their worker screening to come back. Hopefully that was helpful, Anna. If you want to screen share, I do free 15-minute consults. Feel free to book into my diary and open your Proda, and we'll guide through together and try and figure this out for you, because it is a requirement as a registered provider and it's something that's really important to do. Hopefully that was helpful. If you have other questions, please keep them coming. Thanks.